Alright, hey guys, today I'm going to be changing the intake gaskets on my 2001 Dodge Dakota. It's got a 4.7 liter, but lately I've noticed that there's more of a hissing coming from under the hood, and I know it wasn't my cold air intake that I had on there. And after doing a little bit of investigating, putting my ear to a screwdriver and looking around, it's actually like the left front intake valley, like the lower intake gaskets are leaking there. So I ordered a new set of gaskets. So I'm going to be changing those today. Now it's pretty obvious when you walk up. You can hear the hissing pretty good. Hope the camera picks that up decently, but yeah, it's pretty obvious that the hissing sound isn't coming from the right side where the intake filter is, and then when you shut it down, it'll hiss a little bit after you shut it off, and it's pretty obvious. So that's what I'll be changing today. Alright, for the first step, to remove the intake, obviously need to take off my cold air intake. You might have a factory intake, which is, there'll still be usually like a band clamp like that there to loosen up. And as far as factory goes, normally, I'm trying to remember how they hook in. I'm pretty sure they're bolted there, and there's usually another one right there on the side, and that's where the factory intake will be. Then there'll be an intake box here, which I believe bolts there. I'm not sure if there's anywhere else, because when I bought this truck, it didn't have a cold air intake on it, or it didn't have a factory intake. It already had a cold air intake. But that's the first step. Second step after that is the coolant lines here that go to the heater core. You can either undo these and just completely put them out of the way, or sometimes when you take off the intake, stock or aftermarket, you can lift these up out of the way, so that way when you do get to the point of lifting the intake, you can actually get to it. After that, you can see on the coil packs that are, obviously they all are individual for each spark plug, there will be, I believe it's a 10mm bolt, and then you can take out the coil plugs for each spark plug. Then underneath that, there's another bolt head that takes out the actual stud that's holding down the intake, and that should be all that holds down the intake as far as hardware goes. Well, you can either do that first, or obviously take there's a vacuum line here, or yeah, I think that's a vacuum line. Then there's two sensors here, those need unplugged. Your engine oil dipstick, that unbolts right there. That looks like maybe an 8mm if I remember right. The throttle cable, usually that you can just loosen it up enough to take it out and pop it off, or you can just unbolt the whole intake throttle body and just kind of have that out of the way so you don't have to undo the cables. But let's start that and see where we get. Alright, so a little update. This is as far as I've gotten so far. I took off the throttle body. That's just 3 8mm bolts. There. The throttle cable, as I said, once you unbolt that, this one, it just pops off. There's this little thing here, see if we can focus. Kind of hard to, there we go. See, it just kind of pops in, and the other one, you just have to pull it around and it comes out of a slot. The mounting bolts, there was, let's see, I think that one was an 8 on top, another 8, and then I thought that was it was only 2, but there's actually another one behind there. And then that unbolts, which also unbolts the engine oil mount too. After that, took off all the bolts holding on all the coil packs. That was a 10mm. And now, as you can see, like I said on the bottom, you obviously need a deep well socket for this, another 10. and then it takes these studs out, and that should be the only thing holding in the actual intake itself is those 10mm studs. Now, I'm going to take those out. Almost forgot, with the throttle body, there's another plug right there that you have to unplug. I think it's just a temperature sensor. But getting off track. Other than the bolts, see, there's another extra one in there in the back. Is there another extra one in the front here? Oops, let me just make sure. Yes, there's another extra one in there in the front. So if you take off all the studs that hold on the coil packs, don't forget there's a bolt there. And another one there in the back. But I'm going to take those off and see if I can't wiggle the intake around the coolant lines that go to the heater core. Like I said, if not, no big deal. You could just loosen the clamps, well, not loosen, pinch the clamps, slide them back, then pull these off and kind of have them facing upwards. That way you don't leak antifreeze all over. So I'm going to try that and see where I get. Alright, so now I got all the studs out, with the inclusion of the one bolt on that side and the one right behind the AC compressor. I figured it'd just be easier, take off the coolant lines. That way I can lift it straight out. As far as those go, like I said, it's just the kind of clamps, you slide them back. You might need to use a little bit of elbow grease to break them loose, because, you know, being heater lines, usually they kind of almost glue themselves onto. I was able to break them loose with just my hands. Undid this hose, which goes to the brake booster. It plugs right into the intake there. And this is a vacuum hose. It plugs in back there, right there. There's no kind of fitting on it, just kind of pops in, and it's just like rigid, hard plastic. Be careful when prying this out of the way. It rotates right there pretty easy in that elbow, so that's out of the way. But those are kind of fragile, easy to break. Let's see here. Now the intake should be loose, and it is. Now I watched some how-tos online that said that you had to remove the fuel rails, because the fuel rail is right here. It kind of goes across, kind of in front of the intake, but I'm convinced that I can slide back just enough to get it out. So let me see if I can. I might have to stop filming and then resume. Yeah, I'm gonna have to stop filming and I'll just resume when I get it out, and you'll know if I had to take off the fuel rails or not. Also forgot to mention, if you're trying to get it out without removing the fuel rails, and if you don't touch that, you will miss another sensor. There's another sensor right there, which uses torque spit screws. I don't know if you can really see them that well. Trying to focus on there. But yeah, I believe that's probably like a IAT sensor, intake temperature, or not temperature, pressure. But, so I'm going to remove that and then still see if I can get it off without removing the fuel rail. Alright, now I got the intake off. And actually, there's a hose in the back of it that I almost forgot about until I started pulling on it and was wondering what was holding it. This hose goes from the back of the intake to the front and plugs in on the side of the oil fill right there. It's like where the oil PVC thingamabobber is. But yeah, other than that, I didn't really have anything else that I had to take off. I was able to keep the fuel rails on without having to purge the system. Like I said, I just had to take off the one sensor on the front of the intake, which is, where did that go? Oh, that's the back of the intake. That's being retarded. It goes right there. And that used, what was it? T20 torque spits. You know, one of the little pointed bobbers there. This camera sucks at focusing, but you get the point. Then as far as gaskets, I got some new ones. Now these ones are very simple to change. They just, you pull the other ones out, and pop these in. They just kind of slide in place. There's guides, and then they go right in. Make sure you torque them down properly, which next clip I'll look up what the actual torque value is so I can do it properly. But as far as the box, it's just normal Velcro gaskets. I guess that's the part number, MS93205. Correct me if I'm wrong. Description, if this damn thing will focus. Intake manifold. So I guess that's the part number if you want to use that, if you're doing 4.7 intake gaskets or are looking into them. Alright, let me pop these in and then we'll go from there. Alright, now the next step after you take out your old intake gaskets is try to clean up as much as you can where the gaskets actually go in. For the intake, the plastic upper part, it's not as crucial as on the actual mating surface here. If you can see, some of it is actually pretty dirty. So do your best. I've already started like on this one. Just use like a razor and try to keep, you know, stuff out of the falling in the intake, because motors don't like to run on extra crap besides fuel and air. So yeah, use razor, clean up the mating surface as best you can. That way you won't have to take it back off because you have another intake leak because you did it wrong. Alright, now we got our intake runners all cleaned up. Got them all wiped down, scraped off. So those are all ready. New gaskets, like I said, all they do is just press in. The old ones you can just use a small screwdriver, grab an edge, and they'll just pop right off. These ones, they're probably factory original, but they're squashed pretty flat. Like there's actually not as much of a nub that was sticking out. It was almost completely flat with the mating surface there. And as you can see, they need to stick up a little bit, otherwise there's no gasket to squish, and that's how air gets by and your engine will run richer, and then you'll get worse miles per gallon, like I've been getting. With the intake leak on mine, I've averaged usually 13 miles a gallon going around town to work. Now, I don't know if it was a fluke or not, but once I got up to 20 miles per gallon on the highway, but that was one constant speed doing, you know, like 70, 75 the entire way. But, yep, let's throw this on and let's see if we make a difference. Alright, now I got the intake back in and all torqued down. As far as torque specs, what I looked up was, let's see, it's about 8.5 foot-pounds is what you want to torque them to, and you want to actually torque them in sequence. You start with the middle ones, so you go 1, 2, then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So basically you're just going in a crisscross pattern, working your way out. And there's a hood there. And once you do that, then it's basically just the reverse of installation. Everything gets put back in. As far as the coil packs, if you well, it's pretty much impossible to crisscross any of these because the wires are only short enough for each of their respective cylinders. But if you did for some weird reason, like, you know, you extended harness for some reason or something, just match up, you know, 6 with 6. That's on the fuel injector. They're labeled from the factory, so it basically makes this an idiot-proof system. But other than that, I'm going to throw this all back together, then I'll do the next clip of startup and see how she sounds. Alright, everything's hooked back up. Let's see how she goes. Stick it over there. A little nervous, but should be fine. It was actually pretty easy to do. Actually, I think that's from my throttle body. My throttle, it didn't come with a new throttle body gasket, and now it's hissing there. So, well, at least the intake gaskets are changed. Hopefully this can help some people out with changing them. Alright, quick update. It wasn't my intake, or my throttle body gasket. That little hose right there. Look at that. So, that's just a quick update that my intake gaskets, they actually might have still been good, but you know, it's still good preventive maintenance. I changed them, and make sure you check all your hoses, because like I discovered that hiss there, I thought that was intake gaskets, but you know, I'm not even mad because the gaskets were only like 20 bucks. So, like I said, preventive maintenance, and it did look like they were leaking a little bit, but obviously this loud hissing was that. So, just a little update there.